Jessica approached Bonnie cautiously and crouched down to make her eyes level with the enormous rabbit. "Are you in there?" she whispered. There was no response. Jessica reached out slowly to touch his face. John watched, tensing. But as Jessica petted the rabbit, not even just stirred in the middle of the basement. Finally, she straightened and took a step back. Then looked helplessly at John. "There's nothing." "Shh," he interrupted. A noise caught his attention. "What is it?" John bent his head, craning closer to the sound, though he couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. It was like a voice in the wind. Words swept away before he could catch them, so that he couldn't be sure it was a voice at all. "Is anyone here?" he murmured. Excuse me. He looked at Freddy Fazbear, but as he tried to focus his attention, the sound situated itself. He turned to the yellow Freddy suit. "You're here, aren't you?" asked the bear. He went to the animatronic and crouched in front of it, but he couldn't try to touch it. John looked into its shining eyes, searching for any of the spark of light he had seen that night. When the golden bear entered the room, they all knew was every fact that Michael, their childhood friend, was inside. John could remember precisely how that knowledge had come. There was nothing behind the plastic eyes, nothing different physically. It was just pure serenity. He closed his eyes, trying to call it back. Maybe by recalling that essence of Michael, he could conjure him again, but he couldn't catch it. Couldn't sense the presence of his friend as he had thought. John opened his eyes and looked at all the animatronics one by one, remembering them alive and mobile. Once the children stolen by William Afton had watched him back from inside, were they still inside now, dormant? It was horrible to think them moldering down here, staring into the darkness. Something flickering in the yellow bear's eye, almost imperceptible, and John threw down a sharp breath. He glanced behind, checking for a light that might have glanced off the hard plastic surface, but there was no obvious source. "Come back," he pleaded silently, hoping to see the spark again. "John," Jessica's voice pulled him back to reality. "John, I'm not sure that this was a good idea." He, he turned toward her voice, then stood, his legs cramping. "How long have you been there?" Staring into the blind eyes of the mascot. "I think there's still someone in there," he said slowly. "Maybe so, but this doesn't feel right." She looked down from John toward the suits again. Their heads had moved. They tilted up unnaturally, facing John and Jessica. Jessica screamed and John heard himself shout something unintelligible, leaping back as if he'd been stung. They were all looking directly at him. John took 3 experimental steps to the left, and they appeared to track him. Their eyes stayed fixed on him and him alone. Clay had grabbed a shovel and was holding it like a baseball bat ready to strike. "I think it's time to go," he stepped forward. "Stop, it's okay," John exclaimed. "They know that we aren't enemies. We're here because we need their help." John opened his palms toward the creatures. Clay lowered the shovel, though he kept it in his hand. John looked at Jessica, who nodded rapidly. John turned back to the mascots. "We're here because we need your help," he said again. They gazed at him blankly. "Remember me?" he asked awkwardly. They continued to stare, eyes frozen in their own poses as they'd been before. "Please listen," he went on. "Charlie, you remember her, right? You must. She's been taken by creatures like you, but not like you." He glanced at Jessica, but she was watching anxiously, trusting this to him. "They were animatronic suits, buried under Charlie's house. We don't know why they were there." He took a deep breath. "We don't think they were built by Henry. We think they were built by William Afton." As soon as John said the name, the robots had all begun to shudder, convulsing where they sat. It was as if their machinery was being jump-started by a current too powerful for their systems to absorb. "John," Jessica cried. Clay stepped forward and grabbed John by the shoulder. We have to get out of here, Jessica said urgently. The mascots were seizing wildly, their arms and legs jerking, their heads banged against the back wall with painful clanks. John stood rooted to the spot, torn between the impulse to run to them, to try and help and the urge to run away. Go now! Clay shouted over the noise, pulling John backward. They made their way back up the basement stairs. Clay followed behind with the shovel raised defenselessly. John watched the mascots convulsing on the ground until they were out of sight. We need your help to find Charlie, he shouted one last time, as Clay slammed the basement door and snapped three shiny new deadbolts shut. Come on, Clay said. They followed him, chasing by hideous clanking and banging noises, only slightly muffled by the floor beneath. He held them back through the living room to a small study branching off from it, where he shut the door and bolted up. They're coming up, John said, pacing and watching the ground beneath his feet. Metal ground against metal. Something crashed like it was slammed against the wall. The echo reverberated through the floor. Block the door, Clay ordered, grabbing one of the desks in the corner. John grabbed the other side as Jessica cleared a path for them, yanking two chairs and a lamp out of the way. They dropped in front of the door as beneath them something scraped against the concrete like it was being dragged. Heavy footsteps took the foundation of the house. The high-pitched whine of malfunctioning electronics filled the air, almost too high to hear. Jessica rubbed her ears. Are they coming for us? No, I don't think so, John said. He looked up to Clay for reassurance, but Clay's eyes were on the door. The whine intensified, and Jessica clapped her hands over her ears. The footsteps grew louder. There was a noise like cracking wood. At the door, Clay whispered. There was a loud thud, and then another. John, Jessica, and Clay sank down beneath the desk, as if it were a better to hide them. Another thud responded. Then a sound of splintering wood. The earth-shaking footsteps came closer. John tried to count them to see if the creatures were all together, but there was too much overlap. They layered over one another, rattling his teeth and shaking through his chest. It felt like the sound alone might break him to pieces. Then quickly the footsteps faded and were gone. For a long moment, no one moved. John gasped to breathe, realizing only now that he'd been holding his breath. He looked at the others. Jessica's eyes were closed, and he gripped her hands together so tightly that her fingertips had gone white. John reached out and touched her shoulder, and she jumped, her eyes flying open. Clay was already standing, tugging at the desk. Come on, John, he said. Help me get this out of the way. Right, he said unsteadily. Together they shoved it aside and hurried out into the hall. The front door stood wide open to the night. John rushed out to look. The grass outside had been torn up where the mascots shuffled through. The tracks were obviously and easy to follow, leading straight into the woods. John broke into the run, chasing after them. Clay and Jessica at his heels. When they reached the cover of trees, they slowed. In the distance, John saw a blur of movement only for an instant, and he motioned the others to hold back. They would follow, but they didn't dare be seen by whoever was leading the way.